And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. We've been talking about Dr. Mark Harwood, who was talking with us last week. Very interesting chat. And, of course, we're talking a lot about outer space and about, how scientists look at things. And it's interesting, Dr. John. You've talked many times about how they've always got to find records with the numbers to get people interested in reading their stories. And, of course, they've got to have the right words in their papers as well to get them published, don't they?
Well, that's right, and of course there's lots of words that they have to absolutely avoid. And you see, even though it's very obvious to scientists and others that there is, they say apparent design in some of the things that they see in biology, it's very obvious that it is design, and yet they're not allowed to say that because design is incompatible with evolution. Yeah. Because by definition, evolution doesn't know what it's aiming for. It just happens, and so you can't have anything that looks like it's designed. Yeah. And even though a lot of scientists, and particularly engineers these days, are examining the living world, the biological world, and seeing what looks like great design, and then copying that design, because it works. Yeah. And they find that when they do that, it does work. But scientists who are trying to get papers published can't use the word design, and they certainly can't suggest creation. So even though some of those things look like they're obvious, they're not allowed to use them. And so they have to throw in words like, supporting evolution and things like that to get the papers published, because all of those papers in scientific journals are what they call peer-reviewed. They have to be looked at by other scientists to make sure that they're sound arguments and that they use the right words. Otherwise, they end up in the waste paper bin.
So how does that process work? You get them peer-reviewed, and once they're peer-reviewed, is that when they can potentially get funding?
Yes. Well, you see, there used to be an old saying in the scientific world, publish or perish. So you've got to have your name up in lights so that you're recognised as a successful scientist. And then, of course, if you're working for a university, your university is likely to get funded for a particular project that you want to investigate. Or if you're outside the university system, you need to get funding, because all scientists have to live. And if they're not employed, then they really have to get funding from all sorts of other sources. And of course, that's been pretty typical in the medical world for years. The pharmaceutical companies sponsor research into products that they manufacture. So really, you have to get funding, and you have to really be able to justify that funding. And the more successful that you've been, and the more papers that you've had published, the more likely you are to get that funding. So really, that's the way the whole thing works. But as Dr. Mark said, all of those papers have to be looking for a natural explanation of things, because they deliberately have to avoid any suggestion that there might be a God. And as he pointed out, evolution really is just atheism dressed up in a lab coat. Because if you exclude God and you have to avoid any possible mention, then clearly it has happened without God, and therefore it's atheistic. So we believe that evolution is probably probably one of the worst teachings that's ever been put out by people, because it really says there is no God.
Yes, that's right. You take one side or the other, and I guess for anybody who tries to find a middle road, they then have issues with. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions. Simply send them through to our text line. That's SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, last week we were talking to Mark, who was, a rocket scientist who was telling us all about, Dr. Mark, I should say, telling us about aliens. And I've got to say, look, during the week I've been watching a show called Lost in Space. I know it's probably a bit of a kid's show, but I love it. I reckon it's really cool. You know, Will Robinson and the robot. And, of course, that's their great adversary in space, the bad robots. And we love watching this sort of stuff. We love watching TV that has, I guess stuff that's just so unbelievable that we almost want to believe it because it's cool or fun or different, or I don't know what it is. It's we're just drawn to watching that sort of stuff, and too often we're drawn to watching stuff that is I guess painted as real and true. Whether it's to do with dinosaurs or aliens or whatever it might be, and we see it on TV all the time. Yet Dr. Mark Harwood was telling us that, no, it's very unlikely that any of this stuff is actually real, as much as sometimes we might want it to be because we want to lose ourselves in, some sort of crazy TV show. The chance of it being real is very, very, very slim.
Yes, well, that's right, Mick. No, not that there's anything wrong with the idea of exploring space. I reckon that's fascinating stuff. But obviously, the issue of alien life is the thing that people have wondered about for years. And of course, most people have a belief in the existence of aliens. Which really does stem from evolutionary belief, because if you believe that evolution happened on Earth without the hand of God, then obviously there's no reason why it couldn't have happened somewhere else in space, on some other Earth-like planet revolving around an Earth, a sun-like star or whatever. Mm-hmm. But as Mark pointed out, at Creation Ministries, we think the existence of alien life is pretty unlikely on theological grounds, because the Bible tells us that the world was created for man, and he was given the earth to have dominion on it and till it and control it and so on. And of course, the entry of sickness and disease was really the result of the sin of man. Mm-hmm. And as Mark said, it would be pretty unfair for aliens to come here and catch diseases that are the result of man's sin, because they didn't have anything to do with that sin. Mm-hmm. And that reminded me, over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the old H.G. Wells book, The War of the Worlds, and Steven Spielberg made that into a movie. Mm-hmm. And of course, the plot there is that the Martians invade Earth, but they eventually get wiped out because they catch one of the diseases that Earthlings have become immune to. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really interesting. And he did make another great point about why it's unlikely that there are aliens, and that's the topic of Jesus being our Kinsmen Redeemer. And the Bible is full of illustrations in the early history that actually point to some of the things that Jesus came to do. And in the book of Ruth, well, I suppose we ought to start with the Mosaic Law, that because they wanted to protect women who might have, whose husbands might have died, or they might have been widows for some other reason or whatever, and they really had nothing. They couldn't work. They had no one to look after them, and the Mosaic Law had provision for what was called a kinsman redeemer. That is, the nearest relative, male relative, would be obligated to take care of that woman. And we find that in the book of Ruth, because Ruth wasn't an Israelite. She was a Moabite, and she had married into an Israelite family, and of course later on her Israelite husband died, and she was then a widow, having come back to Israel with her mother-in-law, because she wanted to be under the Jewish type of theology and belief in God. And so the nearest relative of her former husband was a guy called Boaz, who was a fairly wealthy man, and he was really obligated to take her into his household because that was his responsibility. Mm-hmm. And of course, as a result of that, she gets into the birth line of Jesus. But that's the whole point. Boaz, because he was related to her husband, was obligated to take her on board and look after her. Now, Jesus is then portrayed as our kinsman redeemer, mm-hmm. and he had to be fully human and a descendant of Adam to be our kinsman. Mm-hmm. And what he did was, the redeeming part of it was, with his death on the cross, that brought us back from slavery to sin by the great enslaver, Satan himself. Yep. And so I thought that was a great point. And, there are so many things that we can look at in the Bible that point to Jesus and suggest that alien life is therefore unlikely, because aliens are not a kinsman to Jesus. Mm. He was there at the beginning of creation, and he was God's agent of creation, according to John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And through him all things were created. So that means that aliens wouldn't have any relationship to Jesus, because they're not human. And so that's another reason why we think that alien life is very, very unlikely. Mm. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting stuff. But we've talked about this before. But Mark made those points in a different manner, and I thought it was very, very helpful to me to listen to what he said and take on board a couple of those hints myself.
Yes, and as you travel around, you'll be able to impart them to many other people as you go around the country and the world when you're doing your speeches. Good to know that things are opening up a bit too, Dr. John. You'll be able to travel a little bit further afield, but that might mean that there's a few more breaks. So, yeah, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. He answers your questions that you send through to our text line. That is 0401 949 949. And we also talk about stuff that's come out in the news over the past week or so. And Dr. John, ABC News had a story about an ancient, monstrous dolphin. Well, they found part of its skull anyway. And what I find interesting with the story is how beautifully the artist's impressions have drawn it. Admittedly, they've found a few of these things over time, so I guess they slowly piece together a picture of them. But yeah, they make them look extremely real, which they probably can do with a lot of, different, the rock formations, and even if there was flesh, sometimes it leaves sort of marking in the rock when they pull those layers of rock apart. So they do get an idea of the shape. However, the age, I have to question.
Yes, well, they said this one was 112 million years old. Now, that's a pretty precise sort of an age to give to it. Mm. And, where they got that from, I'm not really sure. But it is wonderful, though, that they are making those discoveries here in Australia, and that was in outback Queensland. And it was a fossil ichthyosaur. And they were a type of marine dinosaur, some argument as to whether they were reptilian or whether they were warm-blooded, because there's been a fossil discovered of ichthyosaurs, one that was actually giving birth to a baby ichthyosaur. And they obviously did give birth to live young rather than lay eggs. But sharks can do that as well, so they could have been a bit fish-like. And ichthyosaur, of course, is a fish-like dinosaur. That's the translation of the word. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they said this was a dolphin-like creature. And I think it's great that there have been so many dinosaur-type fossils discovered in outback Queensland. Yep. And Australia apparently has got remarkably well-preserved dinosaur fossils. In fact, one of the researchers on this article, he made the comment that some of the stuff looks as if it had only died yesterday. Mm-hmm. So clearly it's well preserved. But bear in mind that a lot of those dinosaurs in Queensland have been land-dwelling dinosaurs, the ones around Winton. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, they've found dinosaur trackways in mud, not just in Winton, but even we talked about a few weeks ago a coal mine in Ipswich. Mm. So, yeah, there's a lot in Queensland. And, of course, this one was a marine creature. So here we have a marine creature in Queensland, so obviously associated with the water. And in the same area some years back, they found a plesiosaur, which is another type of dinosaur. So here we have in outback Queensland both land-dwelling dinosaurs and sea creatures. Now, yes. How is it that they're all buried in the same sorts of sediment and area? Well, they speculate about inland seas and all of this sort of stuff, but we think that maybe there was more than just an inland sea, there was a global sea. Yes. and as a result of that global sea that covered the entire earth and is mentioned in the Bible, then all of these creatures drowned and got buried. And I thought it was interesting that they, in one of the places, they found, I think, 30 specimens of, not this big one, but another one. Now, you know, getting 30 specimens together suggests that they all got overwhelmed by the same event, doesn't it? You yes. know, so yeah, I think one of the things that we can say is that all of these discoveries point to the truth of the Bible once again, and the likelihood is that they all got drowned in the great flood that we read about in the Bible, and therefore another piece of evidence that our Bible is true in its history. Absolutely. Well, Dr. John, we've come to the end of our time again. Thank you so much for another awesome week. We enjoy having you here and looking forward to you coming into the studio next week. Yeah, no, it'll be good to get out of the house, Mick, when the studio opens. That'll be great. So I'll see you directly next week. Absolutely. That was Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. They also have a website, creation.com, where you can get answers to thousands of questions. Or, of course, you can send your questions through to us on our SMS line, 040